In this movie, we're going to take a look at a couple of options for creating a motion guide. And we'll start off with a generic canvas size. First thing I want to do is reset my document layout. So I'm going to go to the workspace icon and slide down to designer. And I'm going to also do a reset just to make sure everything is where it's supposed to be from the beginning. Okay, Command 2 and Command 1 centers this. Now, there's a small little issue, and that is if I do a Command return to get a preview, it opened up the output window, and if I close the preview, which of course is nothing because there's nothing on the stage, I get this. And this gets a little annoying after a while, so I'm going to click on this tab, the output tab, and I'm going to drag it down to the bottom and leave it there. Just park it down there. I'll move this as low as I can get it. I'll do another Command 2 and 1. I think I'd rather see my library and my preview. And now when I do a Command return, the output window stays at the bottom. And even if I turn it off, let's go back into Animate. Even if I go to the output window and turn it off, it'll reappear. But at least this way, it's not getting in the way of my artwork or my timeline. So I'll make the timeline a little bit bigger here. And do another Command 2 and 1 to center it. Now the other thing that I want to do is I want to be able to see my artwork on my web page a little easier. So I'm going to go to my window drop-down menu, and I'm going to slide down to my code snippets. And I'm going to take advantage of a code snippet that I already created here called Keyline. So if I open that up, double click, it drops in this code in here, and what it's doing is that it's adding a border to the canvas frame on the web page, and it's also centering it. So if we run this now, we'll be able to see the inside of the banner. Okay, so I'm going to close that, and now we're going to set up an animation. By the way, as soon as you see an action layer show up, lock it so you don't accidentally select it. So let me go back to the front. I'm just scrolling over to the left with my mouse, and the actions layer is there. I don't need anything with it right now, but I do want to draw a shape that I can animate. So I'll just do a simple box. So go to the bottom frame, and I think what I'll do is I'll create a stroke, and I'm going to go to the brush library. I'll go to my arrows, and I'll go to the first one, and I'll double click on that, and you'll see the arrow appear over here in the style. Close that, and now I'll just click and drag a small little arrow, and while it's selected, I'm going to go ahead and increase the size. And I guess I got to select it. So selection, click and drag, or you can do a select all. And now we'll go ahead and change the size. So I just want to be big enough so that we can see it. And I'll change the color of it. I am dealing with the stroke. The stroke is currently set to black, so click on here and I'll make it red so it stands out a little bit better on the black background as well. I'm going to move it off stage over here, and the idea is that the arrow is going to follow a path that I create and fly out. So I'm ready to start that. So over here there are two options that you need to be aware of. We want the option where you click on the layer's name. So if I do a right click on the layer's name, I have the option of selecting the classic masks. All of these options are specific to the larger layer. If you do the same thing on the keyframe, if you do a right click on the frame, these options are relative to the frame. So even within the timeline, there are two options in relationship to how you make this thing work. So we'll go ahead and do a right click on the layer's name, and we're going to convert to a classic motion guide. And that creates an empty layer in here, and this is where I would draw my path. So I'm going to select my pencil tool, which is already open. If you don't have it, you can find it over here, but I already brought mine in. And so I'm just going to draw a line that's going to go around this way, and out. And that's going to be the path of my arrow. And so then what I want to do is I want to set this up for an animation. So I'll select my selection tool, click on the first frame, go to the Insert drop-down menu and create a classic tween. And it wants to convert the arrow into a symbol and also set the timeline for an animation. I'm going to make the animation last for 2 seconds. So I'm going to start at frame 1 and I'm going to end at frame 61. So I'll do an F6 there, or do a right click and insert keyframe. And I want to be able to see the motion guide throughout the animation, so I'm going to click on the top layer, and here I just want to do an F5. I don't want to do a keyframe. I'm not going to animate the guide. And so now I have, back at the beginning, in here, I'm going to hide my guide so I can see my arrow. Here it is kind of hiding out of the way. And I'll come back over here, turn that on so I can see it. So I'm going to grab my arrow, and it wants to snap to the line. I'm going to have it snap to this line in here and let it snap. Now it's a little hard to see what's going on, so let me go ahead and select the stroke. 1, I'm going to make it black, and 2, I'm going to drop the size way down so that way we can see the arrow. Okay, so at the beginning of the animation, the arrow is going to be over here. At the end of the animation, I'm going to take the arrow and I'm going to put it over here. And so now if I scrub back and forth, you can see that the arrow is following the line. And then what I want to do is I want to change the orientation of the letter so that it orients to the path. So in other words, as the arrow goes down this line, it turns and follows the stroke. So the way you do that is you click on the keyframe, and then under the frame options down here on the bottom, you have this orient to path. Click on that. It's always the first frame. Now when I slide this over, you can see that the arrow's trying to follow the path. It gets a little lumpy right in there, and that's because obviously the stroke is curved and does some funky things right there as well. But here's what it looks like. Command return, and you can see the arrow follow its path. If for some reason I wanted the arrow to move backwards, you can do it this way. I'm going to select the arrow here, and let me zoom in here so we can see it a little bit better. Click on that and get the right free transform tool. I'm just rolling around till I see that icon change so that I can spin it. There it is. And I'll turn that upside down. I'm going to go back to the first frame. I'll slide over here to the upper left-hand corner. And this one needs to be turned around as well. So I'll roll around. There's my icon. So I really want to line up the arrow with the path. Same thing over here. So if I come back over here, I want to make sure that that's lined up with the path there. Okay, Command 2. Now the arrow is going to move backwards. Its orientation is now moving backwards with the location. And so you might have figured out it's just a matter of which way this is rotated. So let me zoom in here so I can rotate it. So I want to click. I'm going to lock my guide so I don't select it. Click on my arrow. Roll over here. This time I'm going to have it point straight up. And then on the end, I'll come over here and I'll have it point straight up there as well. Just like that. And now you'll see that the arrow moves through the path always pointing 90 degrees from its relationship to the stroke. So that's how that works. Okay, so that's option 1. That's the easy way to do it. And the thing to remember about option 1 is that you would do a right click over here and you would insert the extra layer for your motion guide, this one right in here. Okay, so let's do another one. So I'm going to do a couple of undos and get back to the beginning. Okay, so here's my arrow. In fact, I think I'll just go ahead and start before I even create the arrow. Okay, so I've got my 2 layers. I've got the layer that puts in the border on the canvas, and I've got an empty layer for my artwork. I'll just go ahead and draw another arrow again. So I'll click on here. Let's see if it remembered. Yep, it remembered it. So I can do that there. And I'll do this one from the bottom. And I'll do a select all. And I'll increase the stroke like that. And now I'm going to do it slightly different. I myself, I'm going to do this manually. I'm going to add a layer. And the top layer is what's going to become my motion guide. And I'm going to click on the layer or double click on it. You'll get the preferences that way. Or you can do a right click and open up your properties that way as well. And what I want to do is I want to make this into a guide. And when I click on this, this is going to change into a T-square. So it's a guide layer. And then when I click on this and drag it straight up and over to the right, it converts the guide layer into a motion guide. And you'll see the icon change as soon as I let go. So that's just the manual way of doing what the right click did when I created a guide layer. It's really your option in terms of how you want to create it. But as we start working with multiple layers that we want to use the motion guide on, this is probably the easiest way to set it up. So then I'm going to go ahead and lock my bottom layer over here, the arrow, and I'm going to come over here to the motion guide. And this time I'm going to draw the guide using the pen tool, which is probably a more precise way of doing it. So I'm going to change my stroke variations, go back to a simple stroke and make sure it's fairly thin. And now I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag and click and drag. The other option is to bring in the stroke from Adobe Illustrator, and we'll be doing that in the tutorial when we start animating text in a path. So here we go. And basically the same setup. So over here I'll unlock my arrow, click on the arrow layer, and I might as well move it over here. Well, actually I'll start animating it first. So here's my arrow layer. I'll go to the Insert drop-down menu and create a classic tween. Motion tween is no longer an option because it's in relationship to a motion guide. So create classic tween. Wants to create a symbol and modify the timeline for an animation. I'll go ahead and hit OK. I want this one to last 60 frames as well, so I'm going to do an F6 there, or an FN6 if you don't have your key program. And I also want to see the motion guide needs to be in existence throughout the whole animation, so I'm going to click over here and I'm going to do an F5. I don't want an F6 because if I accidentally move the motion guide, I don't want it to move in one place and not the other. So this allows me to keep the motion guide in the same location throughout the animation if I don't do an F6. So do it that way. Do an F5 on the motion guide and an F6 on the thing that you're animating. Okay, so we'll go back to the first one and we're going to let's get the selection tool. I'm going to zoom in here so we can see this a little bit better. I'm going to get the free transform tool. The shortcut is the letter Q. And I'm going to roll around in here and I'm going to try to line that up as close as I can to the stroke. And go back to the move tool. I'm going to bring this, whoops, don't want to move my stroke. I'm going to lock the stroke so I don't select that. And now bring the arrow over here off to the edge over here. So just barely sticking in. Now I'm going to do a Command 2, back away, go to the very last frame, grab my arrow, bring it to the end of the animation. I'll zoom in here and I'll grab this and I'm going to see with the transform tool whether this looks straight or not. And it actually looks pretty good. It looks like it's straight enough. Okay, so right now it's not going to orient to its path. Let's Command 2 to back away. Well, it does orient to the path in the sense that it follows the path, but it doesn't orient to the path in the way that it's pointing. And so to do that, you have to remember to go to the first frame, come over here to orient the path, select that, and now we're in business. So this follows the line. It looks a little smoother than the last one because I did it with the with the pen tool. Doing your strokes in Adobe Illustrator is clearly the best way of doing doing it. And that's what we'll be doing in the next movie.